This is a pretty short set of notes. It is the last set of notes for this unit, and it's just introducing you to blood physiology. I'm not talking about everything. I kind of concentrate on red blood cell cycling and also blood clotting. Don't do a lot of immunology, not that it's not important, but I know that you tend to get that in microbiology, and I know that my colleagues do a great job with it. So let's just start briefly acknowledging what blood is composed of. I'm not really going to test you on the before you begin section, but since sometimes people don't get to it in anatomy, myself included, let's look at what blood is actually made of. This photo is a colorized SEM of blood, and you can see that the most abundant types of cells are the erythrocytes, the red blood cells. The bigger ones here are probably leukocytes, although it's hard for me to tell from this picture. And then the littler ones are thrombocytes, which are not whole cells. These are collectively called the formed elements. It's basically blood cells and cell fragments, because I don't know if you remember, but a platelet is not a whole cell. And if you looked at what blood was composed of, it's more than half water. This varies a little bit between the sexes, but this is how it averages. And then less than 1% leukocytes and platelets, and about 45% erythrocytes. Again, it'll vary a little bit between the sexes. The plasma has lots of important things in it, including a lot of the clotting proteins we will be talking about. A lot of the clotting proteins that end up in the plasma were actually made in the liver. And there are quite a few of them. We won't learn all of them, but we'll learn the super important ones. Okay, so let's leave the rest of that review to you guys and just start talking about blood. So what are the physical characteristics of this weird fluid connective tissue? It is truly thicker than water. It's about 5 times as viscous as water. It is sticky because of the proteins and sugars in the blood. It's kind of like if you took interstitial fluid, which was an extracellular fluid, and then packed it full of cells and packed it full of proteins. So it's like interstitial fluid plus. It tends to be a little hotter than your average body temperature. It has a very, very tightly constrained pH. Primarily the urinary system and the respiratory system, which we will do in the last unit, will really constrain that pH to about 7.35 to 7.45. It's isotonic to about 0.9% saline. It makes up about 8% of your total body weight. And then just because of the difference in body size on average, this is not per individual, males usually have about 5 to 6 liters of blood and females have about 4 to 5 liters of blood. Okay, so just a little bit about functionality. Most of this stuff you already know, but blood is transporting things from point A to point B. Oxygen from where, of course, you absorb it at the lungs, the pulmonary capillary beds, to every cell in the body for aerobic cellular respiration. Nutrients from where you absorb those at the GI tract to every cell in the body. Carbon dioxide, which is generated by cellular respiration, has to make it back to the lungs mostly for you to get rid of it. Waste products to wherever you get rid of them, kidneys, liver, skin, and then hormones, of course, go from the endocrine organ that made them to their target cell. And then blood also has a regulatory function. Because it's got proteins and other buffers in it, it actually helps to regulate your pH, not as dramatically as does the urinary and the respiratory system. And it can regulate ion composition from where you've got a lot to where you have a little, for instance, like calcium, which you're going to have a lot of it stored in your skeletal system, and you might need it in your nervous system. And then because blood actually is a fluid that can maintain its own volume via the concentration of sodium in it and also the concentration of a protein called albumin, it helps regulate the fluid volume for the whole body. And then it's the only fluid that we have that can clot. So it protects the body also from fluid loss via clotting. And then, of course, because it's got all of the white blood cells of different types and the antibodies circulating in the bloodstream, although they're not limited to that place, it protects the body from microbes, from precancerous cells, even from toxins. And then because it kind of works like a swamp cooler, from circulating hot parts to cool parts to hot parts to cool parts, it transports heat from wherever the metabolism is highest or the body is hottest to wherever it's coolest, and then cools down the blood again and then brings it back. And also because the blood plasma is largely water, you can form and break hydrogen bonds, and that's a way of managing temperature as well. Okay, so let's start in red blood cell physiology. So with red blood cell physiology, a protein that's important to us is hemoglobin. There's actually a few different forms of hemoglobin, but this hemoglobin, that's the common type of hemoglobin in your bloodstream in an adult, is a protein with 4 subunits, 2 alpha subunits, a subunit meaning a string of amino acids that has a certain folding pattern, 2 alpha ones, 2 beta ones, and in the center of each of the subunits, there is what's called a heme group, and in the center of the heme group, there is iron. So here's iron in the middle there. Why do you care? Well, the heme group in the middle of each of these subunits has the ability to bind to and carry oxygen gas around, which is why hemoglobin can carry oxygen gas around. So there are 2 big parts to hemoglobin. The protein portions that are folded like this are called the globin portion. It's literally IN, which means protein or peptide, and glob shaped. So, and then the heme group, which binds to and carries oxygen. Okay, so when oxygen is bound to the heme portion of hemoglobin, it will make your blood bright red, kind of like rusting. And that is, of course, true in systemic arterial blood or pulmonary venous blood. Now, venous blood, when it's low oxygen, first of all, it's never 0 oxygen. And second, it's not blue. It looks blue when you look at it through the pigments of your skin, but it's not blue. Okay, so how much hemoglobin do we have? Males and females differ a little bit in this. So males have per 100 mils, which is like, I don't know, that much, about 13 to 18 grams per 100 mils, and females have about 12 to 16. And notice this isn't dependent on body size. This is volume, right? So males tend to have more hemoglobin, and therefore they have greater oxygen carrying capacity for the same quantity of blood, and then they have more blood as well. So let's talk about the function of red blood cells, big picture. Red blood cells, and we'll get into this in the respiratory system and the cardiovascular system more, but red blood cells actually carry gases. They don't just carry oxygen. They do mostly carry oxygen. It's a big part of their job. So what happens is as the blood goes through the pulmonary capillary beds in the pulmonary circuit, oxygen is picked up and it combines with the heme on hemoglobin, the iron portion of hemoglobin. And that is called oxyhemoglobin, and it's bright red. And then circulate back to the heart and then pump to the systemic capillaries, and then oxygen is released so that the tissues can use it for cellular respiration. And then it's deoxyhemoglobin. As it goes through the systemic capillary beds, it becomes deoxyhemoglobin. Back to the heart, pump it back to the lungs, oxyhemoglobin. Back to the heart, back to the systemic capillary beds, deoxyhemoglobin. So it's kind of like an oxygen ferry, not flap flap, but toot toot ferry. So deoxyhemoglobin is kind of duller red. Almost all of the oxygen in your body is transported via the above mechanism. There's always a little bit dissolved in the blood plasma, but this is the primary way that you get oxygen to move around. And then, although you may or may not be aware, the hemoglobin molecule can also carry carbon dioxide, but importantly, it does not outcompete oxygen because it doesn't sit in this seat. It actually rides on the globin, not the heme. So if this were a ferry that had 4 oxygen seats, they are reserved for oxygen, and carbon dioxide doesn't sit there. And then it has seats for carbon dioxide as well. So it can carry carbon dioxide, and it can even carry them at the same time, oxygen and carbon dioxide. For instance, you could imagine it going through a systemic capillary bed, and the oxygen hasn't left yet, but the carbon dioxide has gotten on. So while hemoglobin is going through systemic capillary beds, which are generating CO2 as a byproduct of cellular respiration, then the globin portion will pick up carbon dioxide. When that occurs, it's called carbaminohemoglobin. And then deliver the blood back to the pulmonary capillary beds, and then you have to release the oxygen, and then it's exhaled. Only about 20% of your carbon dioxide is carried only about 20% of your carbon dioxide is carried on hemoglobin. Most of the rest travels in the blood plasma as the bicarbonate ion. And we have visited that before, and we'll visit it again. But I'm going to stop right here, and then I'll do erythropoiesis in the next one.